Hey everyone, it's the Gadget Guru. This is going to be a breakdown of the end phase. Um, a lot of players don't understand how the end phase works, so I'm going to be breaking it down to try and explain it for everyone. Um, as you see, I wrote it on the screen. This guide will explain and show you how the end phase works, and for many players, it will help you learn the game mechanics better to still gain certain effects in your end phase. Um, Knowing the end phase mechanics is very important because it does influence a lot of competitive play at higher levels. If you're not going to a big tournament, you really don't have to know this, but it'll still help you to learn it. So I'm gonna go through and break it down for everyone. The first step in the end phase says, during this step, the turn player may take an action or pass. Um, if the turn player takes an action, you restart these steps. Anytime an action is taken in the end phase, you restart this list every single time. um, so basically, this says during the end phase, the turn player has the priority to activate and resolve any effects that deal with the end phase, whether they're mandatory, optional, whether you're resolving a condition effect, whether you resolve. It doesn't matter what you're resolving. Like whatever you're resolving, it allows you to choose if you want to activate it right now or later. The next step is if you pass your step, goes to your opponent. They may choose to activate a mandatory and optional, blah blah blah. And if that action happens, you restart the list again. Um, step, the next step says, this should be step 3 actually. I mislabeled these. Um, so I'm gonna fix that right now. The next step says if the turn player has yet to perform an action, they are obligated to perform during the end phase. They must take an action. If not, they can pass. If the turn player takes such an action, restart this list. So basically, this says if you enter the end phase and you have an effect which you have to resolve, like a mandatory, like light switch or something, you must resolve it if you can. If you can. If you can't, then you just pass. The next one is the same thing, but it's for the opponent. If the non-turn player has yet to perform an action they are obligated to perform during the end phase, they must take that action. And this is where it's going to become pretty important here pretty soon. I'll give you some examples of this so you can understand why this is important, but I'll do that after this. I want to go through the full list so everyone knows what the list is before I start making examples. And phase step 5 is the discarding from hand. After all effects have been resolved and the end of the turn is coming up, if the turn player has more than 6 cards in his or her hand, they must discard cards until they only have 6. After this step happens, this phase ends and the next turn begins. So this is the last thing to happen during the end phase. Once this happens, nothing else can happen, which is kind of interesting because we were told by Konami that once a player discards cards, it means the turn is over, period. However, we never got an answer back from Konami on what happens if a mandatory effect is, triggers. Like, does it trigger? Because when Super Rejuvenation was running around and people would Super Rejuve for like 12 cards and then discard like Eclipse Weaver in the end, nobody knew whether they got to banish a dragon or not, and Konami never replied to us on that. So that ruling is still up in the air. So if anyone is about to ask me that question, all I can say as an official judge is, for the moment, we're saying that you cannot activate the effect. The reason being is game mechanics will prevent it because game mechanics are ending the turn. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a very good explanation, but until we have official word from Konami, we can't just make rules up. Like, that's not what we do as judges, even though some people believe we do. That's not what we do. We follow game mechanics. These mechanics right here, which a lot of people don't know these exist, and it's why I'm trying to, share them with people and let people know. So, I'm going to go ahead and explain this a little bit. So, I have an example down here of end phase mandatory effects versus effect failure. Player A controls the face ship Bujin Yamato, which player B used effect veil on during player A's main phase 2. When player A proceeds to the end phase, this checklist begins, and this is how it will resolve and why. Now, at the end of this checklist, this can happen. Player A can force his opponent to resolve effect failure, then gain the effect of his Bujin Yamato. How, you ask? Here's how. Okay, I'm going to explain this. So let's say you go into the end phase. You control Bujin Yamato, and your opponent has effect failure, right? So during this step, if you have an effect you want to activate, you can activate it. Let's say you pass this step. Goes to your opponent. let's say your opponent doesn't want to resolve this Effect Veiler, so he passes the step. Now you go to this point. Do you have any mandatories that can be activated? No, because Bujin Yamato is being negated by Effect Veiler. It can't activate if it's being negated, correct? It can't, if you don't know. If it's being negated by a card, it cannot activate. So you pass this step. Now you go to this step. Your opponent has an effect during the end phase in which they still haven't resolved, which is Effect Veiler. So now they are obligated to perform Effect Veiler's end phase effect and remove its condition from the field and have it resolve. So it will no longer negate the monster's effect. Now, if they take such an action, restart this list. This is why it's very important, because now that this happens, now you go back to the top of this list and start again. During the step of the end phase, now do you have an ability you can take? Yes, you do. You have Bujin Yamato. He is no longer being affected by Effect Veiler. This works this way with any mandatory effect during the end phase. Light Sworns, Bujin Yamato, anything in the end phase that regards to a mandatory monster effect versus Effect Veiler. Because the mandatory cannot activate while it's being affected by Effect Veiler, but the minute Effect Veiler resolves, it goes back to end phase step 1, and then you can activate your mandatory. This also works with optional effects, because you can't activate an optional if you can't activate an optional if it's negated by Effect Veiler. So you just like I said, if you have an optional effect, I don't know, I can't think of an end phase optional effect, but the point is, like, you get what I mean. Like, let's say you have an end phase optional effect, and you go this step, you're like, no, I can't take anything. You pass the first step, they pass the second step. Step 3, you have nothing you can activate, so you pass. Now step 4, again, they must perform Veiler, and when they do perform Veiler, and its effect resolves, you restart the list. And so, end phase step 1. Do you have an effect you can take now? Yes, you have an optional end phase effect. You are in the end phase, and you have an optional effect. So, like I said, this list is very important to remember, not only for Veiler mechanics, but for a lot of different mechanics. Another good example. This is going to be, this part of the video will be a bit confusing, but I'll explain it. The end phase is very tricky, but very useful to understand and to know the mechanics behind it. Because optional effects can be activated and resolved at the same time the mandatory effects can, you can choose to activate and resolve all of your mandatory and your optional effects before your opponent can do any. Or just resolve all of your optionals before giving your opponent a chance to do so. Or just all of your mandatories, then force your opponent to resolve all of their mandatories before you begin performing your optional. Now, like I said, the reason this works this way is because of how the list keeps restarting. When you go to the end phase, let's say you have 5 Light Sworns, right? 3 Luminas, a Garoth, and I don't know, let's say a Jane, okay? Let's say you go to the end phase, you got 3 Luminas, a Garoth, and a Jane, right? And let's say your opponent has 3 wind-up Zenmane that you've attacked and they detach. So all of their effects are going to activate in the end phase. So you know your opponent's going to destroy 3 of your monsters when you enter your end phase, right? But because of how you can break down the end phase, when you go to end step 1, you can say, okay, turn player priority, I'm going to resolve Lumina, mill 3, okay? Garoth triggers off that, mill 2 more, okay? Since I took an action, I restart this list. You're in end phase step 1 again, automatically. Resolve another Lumina. After that resolves, end phase step 1 again. Resolve another Lumina. After that resolve, end phase step 1 again. Resolve your Jane. After you're done resolving all of your effects, then you can pass it to your opponent into where he can start resolving his Zenmanes. So even if you're playing Light Sworns, you can still get all of your mills before your opponent can start trying to come back at you. And that's very important to understand, because there's a lot of situations in the end phase where this really does matter. It really does. I mean, for example, one of the common cards used right now is Tsukuyomi, the spirit monster. And a lot of people Effect Veiler. Tsukuyomi, if affected by Effect Veiler, it will do nothing. I mean, yes, the Tsukuyomi won't flip a monster face down, but Tsukuyomi's still going to return to hand, one way or another, because it's just going to go to the end phase. And can you activate anything? No, so pass. Can you activate anything? No, so pass. And then eventually they'll get to step 4, where the non-turn player must resolve Effect Veiler. You restart the list. Look, Tsukiyomi has an effect during the end phase. Return to hand. So this is very important for people to realize, and this is Tsukiyomi, breakthrough skill, all the effects that are like this that last until the end phase are like this. So this is something very important to remember. Another reason why this is important to remember is, let's say your opponent attacks with a monster and then uses an effect which makes it unaffected by spell and trap cards till the end phase, right? Let's say Lance, okay? Say they use Lance on the monster. So you go into your end phase, you don't have an effect you don't have an effect, like, let's say you have a face down breakthrough, let's say you have a face down like Hero Blast with an Alias in the graveyard, and they've got a monster affected by Lance. So you do your end phase, step 1, you pass because you don't have anything you want to activate. They pass because they don't want to resolve their Lance. You go to your end phase step 3, you don't have anything you're obligated to perform, so you just pass that. Now it goes to end phase step 4, and they must resolve their Lance. The minute they resolve their Lance, it again resets to step 1. Now, do you have an effect you want to activate? Sure. Activate Hero Blast in the end phase, destroy their monster, get Alias back to your hand? Why not? Situations like this, like, it really can. I've seen people's knowledge of the end phase mechanics win and lose games all the time in professional play in this game. And when I say professional play, I mean at YCS's, Worlds, Nationals, stuff like that. Like, knowing the mechanics behind this game is very, very important. So this is something I really wanted to put up there and let people know about. It's a really interesting turn. It's one of the less defined terms that we have in the game. Like, Konami really never touched on this, neither did UDE. They tried to avoid describing how this breaks down, but this is how it breaks down. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and post it in the sections. I hope I explained this well enough. If I didn't, I can try and explain. Like, if you have a specific question, I can try and help you with that. But I hope this was explained well enough to where you can understand it. So, this is the Gadget Guru, and I'll catch you later.